Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, quote-unquote live at Universal Studios Orlando's Halloween Horror Nights 30. If you've been living under a rock, Halloween Horror Nights is a usually annual horror event held in Universal's theme parks. Universal Studios is kept open late at night with scare actors populating the park and a variety of themed haunted houses available to walk through. Also, if you live under a rock, stop doing that because rocks are not proper homes unless you're some kind of invertebrate. I probably will only go to Halloween Horror Nights one night, but I got quite a night out of it, kinda. Visiting 5 of the 11 houses, and I even got a couple souvenirs. I'll be breaking my night down in order, but just know that I didn't record or take pictures while in the houses. It's against policy, and I'm not gonna be wearing a hidden camera like I'm trying to spy on the mafia, so I'll instead just be describing my experience. I don't want to visually spoil what you'll see in the houses if you plan to go anyway. This year's overarching theme is that Jack is back for the 30th anniversary. He's a killer clown who is essentially the most popular mascot for Halloween Horror Nights. Jack's house this year is HHN Icons Captured, which features all the icon mascots from previous Halloween Horror Nights, but I didn't visit this house. I was in a group, and we just went into houses on a spontaneous whim. The goal of the night was not to make this video eventually, making sure I'm checking boxes, but just to focus on the moment and have fun. If I went again, I'd surely make the HHN Icons house a priority, though. My personal priority this night, however, was visiting the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house. I went to a Texas Chainsaw Massacre house a previous year, and it was faithful to the original movie, so I wondered what they would do this year with my favorite horror film. Well, first, I should say that Halloween Horror Nights essentially occupies the bowels of Universal Studios. The event is designed to be unintrusive to the mainstream daily operation of the park, so existing areas of the park are repurposed as queue areas with absolutely no scary retheming. You'll find yourself waiting in line in the Curious George area of the park, and maybe there will be some metal music playing in the background. Just so you know, when the Curious George fountain is off, it's just a tube that goes up George's asshole. Disgusting. When you go in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house's queue, you go through the Jimmy Fallon rides queue area, greeted by a giant cutout of Jimmy Fallon himself, which is terrifying on its own. And yes, there is a Jimmy Fallon ride for some reason. It really says something about how desperate Universal is for attractions to try to compete with Disney World when they'll build a ride about Jimmy Fallon that has absolutely zero demand. But hey, at least it's not a James Corden ride. Yet. Why am I talking so much about the queue areas at Halloween Horror Nights? Well, because the reality of any theme park experience is that you're gonna be spending a lot of time waiting unless you have VIP passes, and I want to prepare you for this. The longest line I waited in was 90 minutes on a Wednesday night, but the lines can take longer on especially busy nights, and the houses are only a couple minutes long. The queue areas are Spartan. They're all outside and have no air conditioning, save for a rare fan. So if you're doing this in Florida, you'll be dealing with the full brunt of the heat and humidity surrounded by hundreds of people. It's worth it to check out the houses, but all the standing in the heat is an exhausting experience that you need to take into account. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre house, though, was very cool. You enter through the We Slaughter barbecue and have the classic iteration of Leatherface pop up out at you wearing his butcher mask and once wearing his grandma mask. Maybe the pretty lady mask is worn at one point, but I didn't see it. What surprised me, though, is that the house seems to take place between Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and 2, because Chop Top appears very frequently throughout the house, and even has a particularly psychedelic room dedicated to him. The hitchhiker in his cadaverous form briefly appears, and you can also see Franklin's decomposing corpse. This house totally subverted my expectations. It wasn't another walkthrough of the Sawyer house, but instead a totally new story using Texas Chainsaw Massacre characters, and I highly recommend checking it out if you're a fan. Besides houses, though, there are also scare zones, themed areas you can walk through to have costume characters perform skits or pop out at you in the open. One scare zone was themed after Crypt TV and had a bunch of monster characters from that series, but there was also a weird area involving aliens or some Purge-like shit, a 1984 kind of deal. I wasn't sure, but it was wild. There was also a display marketing Universal's Chucky series for sci-fi. Basically, Chucky silhouettes would pop into random of boxes. Kinda neat, but it's a shame with how much Chucky and Halloween Kills were being advertised at Halloween Horror Nights, they didn't have any Chucky or Michael Myers houses in the Orlando park this year. Sure, Los Angeles gets Halloween 4, but we got no Michael Myers action? Seemed like a missed opportunity, but this year's HHN was supposed to be last year's, so they probably couldn't add in anything else. Halloween Horror Nights also has live shows, but I didn't go to any. It would have been a good idea though, because it'd be an opportunity to sit down for an extended period of time instead of standing and walking for 7 hours straight. The other major house I had to visit was Beetlejuice, and it was okay. It felt like a house that really suffered because of our current circumstances. The Beetlejuice actors all wear plain face masks, so you don't really get to have a good look at Beetlejuice popping out at you in person. The house itself felt more like an art exhibit recreating scenes and sets from a movie, but not so much like an interactive experience you're a part of like the other houses. It's cool as a fan to walk through the house and see, like, the model town for instance, but there just isn't enough done with the actual characters. Like, Lydia just pops out briefly wearing a face mask, and I can't even remember what she says or does. It's just so vague. I also went to the Bride of Frankenstein Lives house, and this was very different from what I expected. Essentially, the house takes place right after the events of Bride of Frankenstein, where the castle blows up. The bride recovers the Frankenstein monster's corpse, and she decides to become a mad scientist herself, reviving her supposed husband's undead form. It's a really weird concept that doesn't quite make sense in context with the movie. The bride hated the monster, and the monster tried to kill her, so I don't see why she would rebuild this dude exactly the way he was without, I don't know, making him hot or something. It's a fun house as a Universal Monsters fan though. It captures the look of the films from the era and even features a cameo by the creature from the Black Lagoon in a tank. Still, I went in the house with folks only familiar with Bride of Frankenstein as a loose concept, and had to explain the context with the film afterwards, so this house might be confusing if you never watched the movie. You should though, because it is my favorite of the Universal classic films, and should be watched by anyone claiming to be a horror fan. I also got a couple souvenirs. There's a big, lavishly decorated tribute store that is fun to explore, but a pain in the ass to navigate and eventually check out of. It took a half-hour waiting in line just to buy shit. What kind of nonsense is that? I got a Universal Monsters glass cup, and I also got one of Halloween Horror Nights' mystery vinyl figures, essentially kind of like a Funko Pop. I lucked out and got Chucky, but there are 6 random figures, and I don't know if rarity comes into play. The figures cost $18, so if you want to collect them all, you're probably gonna have to pay quite a bit blindly. I saw some folks in line buying quite a few things. I wouldn't be surprised if scalping Halloween Horror Nights souvenirs is a big business. Some are selling the Chucky figure I paid $18 for on eBay for up to $40. We live in a terrible world. The other 2 houses I went in were nothing to write home about, but their lines were on the shorter side, so there's that. Revenge of the Tooth Fairy is essentially about a kid who refuses to give his tooth to the titular fairy, so the fairy goes on a killing spree against the boy's family. This house was surprisingly the most gory of the houses I went into, depicting totally eviscerated heads missing teeth. It's a house that was cool for the gore, but I can't remember the settings or monsters that well. Finally, I went in Welcome to Scary, Horror in the Heartland, which I was looking forward to, but I just didn't really understand the theme once I got out of it. You enter through this facade of an old-timey 50s looking town, but when you get into the house, you start out in some sewers with mutants, briefly walk through a bloody diner, encounter some people wearing creepy kid masks, and it ends with some armored guy coming at you with a chainsaw. I just didn't really understand the setting or storyline of the house. I went in expecting it to be more of a scary reimagining of 50s Americana, but it wasn't that at all, and it wasn't very memorable to me. Overall, Halloween Horror Nights 30 isn't one of the strongest years, just based on the 5 houses I went to, of course. I didn't go to all of them, so maybe there were some really great ones I just needed to see. But it's a difficult time, of course, and what was on display that I did see is a worthy escape, and I had a lot of fun. If you are able to, financially and health-wise, visit Orlando or Hollywood and don't mind a lot of standing around, I recommend giving Halloween Horror Nights a visit. It's a way to escape a scary world by, well, being scared, but it's scariness that's easier to understand. If you liked this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. I'd also like to thank these fine folks pledged my shout-out tier on Patreon for all their kind support. Videos like this wouldn't be possible without all their help. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.